Hey everyone. This week I want to talk a little bit about AI and using the right tool for the job. So let's begin with the AI portion of this. One thing I've noticed, most of the stuff that I do is through ChatGPT, but occasionally I'll use Copilot. And especially on the Copilot side, I've noticed that giving it a larger task to do can be problematic. So what I'll typically do is break down what I'm going to do into smaller pieces. Now, as a programmer, I like to do this as a matter of course. And that's because I test things out in little bits and pieces. For example, if I've got a script that I may have queried it, had it produce for me, that talks about getting the USB drives out of Linux, I may want to use that as one little piece someplace else. So that's my little scope to do. I just want to do this one little thing. Now, it was part of a bigger script, but I always go back through the scripts and learn what the thing tells me. And if I do things through, there's a ChatGPT, you can ask it to produce things in Markdown, which is a formatable output, which looks really nice. There's a Markdown piece into Visual Studio Code that allows you to render that page. I'll always ask for an explanation as to what the script is going to do. So that way I have an idea about what I'm working with and why it's set up the way it is. But again, I'll do things in little pieces like that. Like I want to do a rename of all the drives on Linux. But it's part of a bigger package where I want to do a series of copies, and then I want to rename each one of them, and then I want to spit it out, right? I want to reject all those USB drives. So the way to use the AI is for me, to break it into small pieces. Break what you're doing into chunks. First of all, you can vet those chunks to make sure that they're doing what you expect them to do. Having it small makes it much easier to do that. You don't have the complexities to deal with. You can also make them all, if you're using something like Python or PowerShell, you can make those functions, right? You can make it little bits of code that you're going to call later on. Pascal was very good at that. Everything was a small section, and then at the bottom you had a series of calls to those other sections to do the work for you. And this leads me to the right tool for the job. So, as I said, I'm doing a whole bunch of copies, and then I want to rename the drives, and I want to eject the drives. So what's the project? I have, for work, a series of computers that I have to reimage. Now, Rufus is a wonderful tool to create an ISO image, or to start with an ISO image, I should say, and create a nice bootable USB drive. The problem with it is it's a single-threaded, I can't automate it process. So if you're doing one drive, it's great. It gets the job done. You can set up your ISO, right? So you go get your Windows install. And then if you want to add drivers to it, you have to open that up. Use DISM to go grab your drivers and install your drivers into that image. And then you can bundle it back up into an ISO, and you hand that ISO off to Rufus. And Rufus will then go through. It's specifically designed for doing this kind of work. So it's got some very specific questions in there, like if there's certain things you need to bypass for putting Windows 11 on a box, for example, bypassing TPM checks. There's a checkbox for it. And then it makes you a USB. Now, if you want to create the next USB, you have to go eject that drive. Right? In part of Rufus, you labeled it. So you labeled it. It's already got a label to it. You now have to eject that drive, put the next USB drive into the computer, or select the next one you've got attached to your computer if you have multiple ports, and kick it off again. I didn't want to do that because the processes that I'm doing take a while to go through. But I have a couple of 10-port USB ports. And yes, I'll be doing hundreds of drives, so that's why I'm doing it this way. So I've got 10 ports, but again, Rufus isn't going to help me out. So I was looking around for something else to do it, and the best thing that I found out for tool-wise was to use Linux. Linux has a DD command in it that would not only allow me to copy from a USB to that, but I can use that to create an image of the USB, and then I can use that image to make other copies of the USB. And I just have to stack it in there. Again, remember I talked about getting USB drives? So I line up the 10 USB drives into the 10 port that I've got. That USB script will now identify those drives. I'm using an image file, so I don't have to worry about erasing that drive by accident, because it would show up as a USB, right? But if you're familiar with Linux, it's all /dev/sd something. The hard drive is SDA in a lot of cases. So I don't want to use that, so I have to make sure that that script that's getting just the USB drives does what it's supposed to. It just gets USB drives. Okay, it works. Now I've got a script, a piece of script, that I can use in the 3 processes that I need to do. Process 1, copy, using the DD, that image file to each drive in turn. All right, so it'll go through and make an exact copy of that image, and that includes down to the label. So whatever label was on that USB drive is now the label of all the drives. I don't want that. I want the drives to be batched. That way, if something goes wrong with one of the drives, I can see which batch it was in. And I always test at least one drive out of each batch to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. So once I get it all lined up and I run the copies, which this is a big USB that we're doing. It's a 32 gigger that's going on to. And the copies can take, depending on the speed of the USB, on USB 3, take about 38 minutes. To a USB 2, it takes about an hour and 20. So it's a slow process to get these things put on there, or can be. And now you see why I want to just stack them up and go. So that's the first step. Once that's done, I can go proof the drives. And I'm proofing the drives because each drive with Rufus will have 2 partitions to them. But when they come out of the box, they only have the 1. So if I see a drive in there that doesn't show up or only shows up with 1 partition, I know that I had a problem with that drive, and I'll have to pull that drive and play with it. Now, once I've got that done, I can do the labels. Now, because the drive is Rufus and it's an NTFS drive on the outside with a fat partition, and that's so that the UEFI, apparently that's part of the UEFI process, is to have a fat partition which has very little data to it, and then the NTFS partition. I have to do 2 different names, and I've got to grab the partitions. Remember, I just grabbed the USB drives, not the partitions. Well, the partition is 1 and 2. Easy peasy. Just rip through, take care of those, and I'm done. But now I need to eject them. Now, the reason you need to eject drives is because NTFS can flag that drive as dirty. All right, it's got literally a dirty flag on there, which means, hey, this wasn't ejected properly, and I'm not sure if it's correct. Now, that probably doesn't mean much, but certain processes will look at that drive and go, I don't trust it. It's got that flag set on it. I don't like it. And that includes DD. So if you try to copy a drive that's got that flag set, DD in Linux will actually complain about it as well. And I believe I've been seeing that on some boxes where some drives had been ejected by just pulling them out, and it caused problems. So as part of the process I'm doing, at the very end, I eject all those drives from Linux so that Linux now has taken them out correctly. Again, 3 processes. I've got that check step in between process 1 and process 2 that I want to do manually just as a sanity check. I don't really need to do it. I could do a bash script, because these are all bash, and do a bash script that calls these 3 scripts in series and just let it go, right? Once it's done with the copies, then it could do the labels and then it could eject them. I like to just double check things and make sure that what I expected to happen happens. Now, could I do that programmatically? Yes, I could, because again, I know what the drives are. I know what the partitions are. I know that one partition should be NTFS and the other should be FAT. I could query them to find out what file systems they are. I could query them to make sure that I've got a partition 1 and a partition 2. I could put that step into the process, but it doesn't take me that long to do an LSBLK to just double check to make sure that what I expect to see, I see. And if I see something that looks off, I can go in a little deeper on it. But again, the proper tool in this case was to use the Windows machine to create my ISO for imaging my Windows boxes, and then to use DD with that original USB, which I already vetted. I know that USB works, to make an image file up of it, and then use that image file to create other drives. And again, I'm checking one in every batch just to make sure that the batch did go through okay. Because if there's a problem with one, there's probably an issue with the entire batch. Then when I label it, they're batched labeled, so I know what batch it was created in, and I know the process, what was bundled onto these things. These also have auto install scripts on them, so it's kind of a turnkey operation. You pop it in, you tell it to boot from that drive, and sit back and let it go. So again, the proper tool. AI worked great for me to get some things together. AI can sometimes do a pretty good job of doing conditionals and things. So while I got some of it out of AI by creating the script, then when I went into Visual Studio Code, which also has something built into it that helps with that stuff, it can help finish things off. It can help me add the if conditions in there. All I have to do is start with them, and if it looks at the line above and figures out what the if condition is that I want to do. For example, I want to run an NTFS fix on the drives just to make sure that everything's clean. All right, I can do that. And once I put the partition in and told that I wanted that partition name based off the drive name, and I started if, it said, oh, you want to know if that partition exists, and gave me the framework to do a yes and a no. Right? Okay, great. I've got my yes. If it finds it, run this NTFS fix on it, and I'm done. So using that as, again, a tool, the right tool for the job. For me, it's using VS Code to do the scripting. And yes, its helpfulness can get extraordinarily annoying sometimes when you're trying to type something and it thinks you want something different, so it's trying to be helpful. Hopefully that'll get better as things go. But using that, using a little ChatGPT, I haven't had as much luck with Copilot with that. Copilot does okay with little bits of PowerShell that I need from time to time that I can't remember the format for or something. But other than that, it's much easier to just do these things in little bits. And again, Rufus is the tool to make for if you're going to make a bootable USB drive that's going to do Windows, but there isn't a real clean Windows equivalent that's going to allow me to script the creation of these USB drives. So switch over to a different operating system, switch it to Linux, use DD, which is just a bit-by-bit copy of one drive to the other. Again, the downside to something like that is all the drives that I use have to be similar. And I learned out that not all drives are the same, because the ones that I've got, I had a couple from a different manufacturer, and DD was coming back saying, I'm out of space. Both 32 gigs. But because the image is based off of that primary USB that I used, it doesn't transfer as well across to the others. Now, the way around that would be to go back to Rufus. All right, I've got 10. So let's say we're sticking to 10 at a time. You go to Rufus, pop that drive into Rufus, burn it to that drive, and the other 9 drives are identical. You could put that in slot 1, so it's SDA, and then say, instead of having an image file, just copy SDA to the rest of these drives, and you're done. You just change the image command to go from the input file as being an image to the input file being the drive, and you can do an entire set. Now it's still automated for 9 of them, and you have a little bit of manual step 4, step 1. Not that much of a difficult process at that point. But again, finding that right tool for the particular task that you're trying to do is very important. And don't try, if you can avoid it, to just dovetail things into a process. Like I said, Rufus doesn't have a command line, so I can't automate it. I could just keep doing that and keep going back to the computer, every 30 minutes, have to go to that computer and say, okay, this one's done. Now eject it, leave Rufus open, pop the other drive in, Rufus will see it, select it, and then go. It's an annoyance to me. Plus, it means that I can't work on things the way I would normally work on it, which is just beginning to end, because I've got to have a stopwatch, right? This is going to be done in about 40 minutes. Every 40 minutes, I have to break up whatever I'm doing, go look at that drive, see if it's done, swap them, go back to what I was doing again, and wait another 40 minutes. It was just too much. For the number of drives I'm doing, it was too much interruption in my day for that. But that's what I got for you guys. If you're going to use AI, make sure you keep it short and sweet. Don't let it go too complex. The more complex it gets, the more difficult it can be to unravel what went wrong, even if you use the AI to help you unravel what went wrong. But it's also just easier to do things in bite sizes. It's easier to test it. It's easier to verify things are working. Now, it's not to say I haven't done a couple that did some pretty big things, including having database setups, where I was brainstorming a completely greenfield operation. But again, I found that if I do that, there's usually some series of issues that have to be tracked down in there, and it's easier just to do the thing a piece at a time and go from there. So that's what I got for you guys this week. I will talk to you all next week.